The spring sun remains, the snow returns. Chapter 1, Cold Moonlight. Snowflakes are like feathers, floating lightly on the land of Mobei, covering everything flawlessly. It was a gloomy night, and the eldest princess Feng Lingying walked lonely into the deep ink garden, this dark world, where she had fallen. After years of suffering here, her heart has long been as cold and hard as ice and snow, ruthless and desireless. She remembered that the palace people who used to smile at her back then, no one knew where she was now. Rizakura, you must become the strongest assassin, or you will not be able to escape this endless darkness. She had heard Master Lin Yingchen's cold voice, and it still echoed in her ears. When she was sold into this place, her heart was filled with resistance, but in the end, she could only choose to suffer in silence. Her identity, the former eldest princess, has long been forgotten. She is no longer the princess in flowing clothes and the fate of the world, but a killer named by Mandarin Duck, sinking into this boundless darkness and becoming the fate of her own choice. However, her fate did not end there. That unexpected encounter made her meet the man, Lu Hongyi, a resolute and domineering general, but he also hid a heart as cold and hard as her. Chapter 2, The Light. Who are you? She slowly opened her eyes, and in front of her was a man in a red robe, and there seemed to be some kind of glint in his eyes. At that moment, she suddenly felt that the heavy burden of life had changed over the years. My name is Lu Hongyi, he smiled slightly, and that smile was like the warm sun in the cold winter, shining into her cold heart. You have nowhere to go, you have no place to belong, but there is still a place that belongs to you. At that moment, she decided to fight for him, even if it was to disobey the order, even if it was to meet death. She is no longer a cold-blooded killer, she is Lingying, and for him, she is willing to find that glimmer of life. However, the twist of fate came so cruelly. Chapter 3, Goodbye to the Past. By Lu Hongyi's side, she found the peace she had not seen for a long time. The two have been married for 2 years, but he is always suspicious and wary of her every move. She's just a former killer, is this marriage because of love, or is it because of power? Lu Hongyi often treats her as a mystery, and the doubts in her heart seem to never be released. Every time she cared, every time he looked away, it made her feel more and more painful. This life of mutual suspicion is like an endless tug-of-war. Rizakura, why are you always so upset? You're not my wife, but I can't think of you as my wife. Lu Hongyi sometimes said this, looking at her coldly, his eyes full of defense and helplessness. She knew that this marriage was no longer a continuation of love, but a transaction between fame and fortune, but she still couldn't leave. Chapter 4, Residual Poison and Indulgence. The aftermath returned, and she finally felt physically and mentally exhausted. These 2 years of married life have exhausted all her energy. Her body was weakening, but her mind was numb. No matter how much she giving, the relationship never seemed to bring her the comfort she craved. She began to face it all with a pretended indulgence. She no longer expects Lu Hongyi's indifference, nor does she try to change anything. She learns to accept that the world that once belonged to her no longer belongs to her. If you still want to go, go. She looked at Lu Hongyi, and there was no fluctuation in her eyes. It was a game she had already decided to let go. However, this is not the end. Chapter 5, Encounters in the Snow. One cold morning, she walked in the snow, reminiscing about the past. Suddenly, a familiar figure appeared in front of her eyes. Lingying, how have you been all these years? The man asked. She raised her head and saw those familiar eyes. It was Lin Yingcheng. The master of the year, once a lamp in the dark world. Master. She whispered, a hint of mixed emotion flashing in her eyes. Lin Yingcheng looked at her, his eyes full of worry. If you go too far, the world won't let you go, Rei Sakura. You shouldn't give up on yourself. She smiled slightly, but there was helplessness in her eyes. I have long since lost my old self, Master. At that moment, she finally understood that no matter how cruel fate was, she still needed to choose her own path in the end. Perhaps, true indulgence is not to sink, but to dare to face oneself and face those irretrievable pasts. Chapter 6, The Return. She returned to the identity of the eldest princess, and stood in the familiar court again. Lu Hongyi's eyes have tenderness and remorse that have never been seen in the past. However, for her, it all seemed to be no longer important. She had been indulgent and detached, but now she was finally able to stand in her own footsteps to welcome her new life. She no longer needs to rely on anyone, nor does she wait for anyone's forgiveness. She has her own light, and this light belongs to her. Her fate is no longer decided by others. Chapter 7, Trial and Rebirth. After returning to the palace, Feng Lingying secretly swore in her heart that this time, she would no longer let anyone decide her fate. The palace was still the familiar cold territory, and every step resounded in this ancient hall. She walked through those familiar doors, but her heart was unwavering. She is no longer the eldest princess who was commanded, nor is she the lonely girl who was abandoned in the ink garden. She is a woman who is in control of her own destiny. Rizakura, why did you come back? A cold voice interrupted her musings. She turned around and saw Lu Hongyi, who was still so handsome and unparalleled, but there was a little less steel firmness in her eyes, replaced by more guilt and helplessness. He was still wearing the familiar armor, but it looked a little heavy. I'm back. She replied simply and plainly, without excessive tone. She knew that the marriage no longer had any meaning, and no matter how he changed, she no longer lived for him. You no longer live for me, but for whom are you going to live? He looked down and looked her in the eye, this time not dodging. There was a tingling in her heart. The days when she loved each other deeply had long been covered by countless lies, temptations, and suspicions. Her voice was low and tired. I live for myself. At this moment, complex emotions appeared on Lu Hongyi's face, which was remorse, pain, and a trace of indescribable deep self-blame. He understood that the relationship broke down not entirely because she had been a killer, but because he had never really believed her. His suspicion has become the deepest estrangement between them. Chapter 8, The Broken Oath. Rizakura returned to her palace, and in that cold and lonely hall, there was no longer the splendor of the past. She stood alone in front of the window, looking at the snowflakes in the sky. She didn't have too many regrets in her heart, but more relief. The interweaving of fates and ruthless tests made her never let go of her true will. In her life, the most important thing is not who will give her happiness, but whether she can have the power to decide her own fate. No matter how dependent you once were on others, in the end, you have to go back to your own heart. She will never let others dictate her choices again, and she will never let her fate change by anyone's will. At that moment, there was a soft knock on her door. She didn't look back, just said lightly, "Come in." A figure walked in. It was the former shadow, Lin Yingcheng. She raised her brow slightly, and a hint of surprise welled up in her heart. She didn't remember that Lin Yingcheng had come to the palace so early. Lin Yingcheng's voice was low. I know you don't like to be drawn into this palace struggle, but your return is destined to be the beginning of this storm. She turned around, looked at the former master, and smiled coldly. I am no longer the princess, nor the assassin of the past. I'm Rizakura, a woman who can control her own destiny. No amount of storm will bring me to my knees. Lin Yingcheng was silent for a moment, his eyes full of deep helplessness. If you do, be prepared for this storm. This deceitful court struggle will be the most difficult test of your life. I'm ready. Her eyes were cold, and her tone was a little firm. As long as I don't live for anyone anymore, I can bear all the trials. Chapter 9, The Fierce Game. With the return of Ling Ying, the palace was full of turmoil. She is no longer the eldest princess who was slaughtered back then, and this time, she will appear in the court with a new attitude. And Lu Hongyi, the man who was once full of doubts about her, gradually entered her plan. The deceit in the court is not just a game of power schemes, but also a contest of psychology and intelligence. Ling Ying has long been accustomed to intrigue and intrigues, and Mo Yuan's training has taught her how to survive in the dark and how to control her fate in unknown corners. Every step she takes, every tiny move, is precisely calculated. However, Lu Hongyi has never been able to completely let go of his suspicions about her. He once thought he could control everything, but found that in this game, Ling Sakura was the most elusive chess player. He realized that his love for her had long been distorted by his own doubts and distrust. He wasn't sure if he could really get to know her. Chapter 10, The Final Choice. Late one night, Rizakura was once again standing alone by the palace window. Her gaze looked through the layers of snowflakes into the darkness beyond. Lin Yingcheng appeared behind her, his figure looking particularly gloomy in the moonlight. Rizakura, now is your time for the real choice. Lin Yingcheng's voice was low. You can choose to let go of all this and leave this fight. But in this way, you will never be able to have the power that is truly yours. Ling Sakura tilted her head slightly, and a hint of determination flashed in her eyes. I have never had a desire for power, and the so-called power is, for me, only a tool to control my own destiny. As for this struggle, I've decided that I have to win this battle. There was a determined light in her eyes, and determination had been formed. She will no longer be anyone's pawn, she will write her own ending in this game.